This knowledge clip is about motivation, and specifically the central question will be, is motivation for sale? So can we buy it? Before we answer that question, let's first reflect on what is motivation in the first place. So from a traditional perspective, motivation is all about carrots on the right side and sticks on the left side. In other words, it's about incentivizing and punishing. Do we want less of a certain behavior? Use the stick, punish it, and it will go away. Do we want more of a certain behavior? Use the carrot, give people some kind of incentive, some kind of reward, and suddenly they'll be running like a madman. But is this everything there is to it? Is motivation that simple? Use the carrot, use the stick? We know a lot about motivation. Decades of scientific research has taught us a lot about what motivation is. Basically what it is a state. So it's a state we're in, which means it's dynamic. It's not a trait, not something that's stable over time, but it's a state. It's a state that arises in certain processes. So that means that not only is motivation dynamic, but it leads to certain actions or behavior. And it can be caused both internally and externally. In other words, motivation can come from within. We find something really interesting to do, and it can come from the outside. So, for example, we get a reward. There are three defining characteristics of motivation. First of all, it has an energizing element. So it sets us into action, into motion. Something happens. Second, it gives us direction. We choose a certain path. We choose a certain direction. We choose a certain goal that we aim to complete. And then third, there's a certain level of perseverance involved. So motivation is about doing something several times and continuing to try to achieve that goal that we wanted to achieve. So motivation, it's a state, it's dynamic, and it has an energizing aspect. It gives us direction and it makes us persevere at what we do. There are many motivation theories. Many theories that have tried to explain how and why we are motivated. And these are just an impression. I could have made this word cloud double the size, maybe even triple or quadruple the size. That's how many theories there are on motivation. So this is just to give you an idea of how many there are. And there's generally two categories. There's the need theories, which are kind of the older motivation theories, and there are process theories, which are more contemporary theories on motivation. Perhaps the most famous motivational theory, which is one of the needs theories, is the hierarchy of needs by Abraham Maslow. Probably every manager has heard of this theory before. And basically what the hierarchy of needs says, it's the pyramid of needs. It starts with physiological needs. So it says we are motivated by a need to eat, to sleep, to drink. If we don't, we die. So that's what motivates our behavior. Once that need has been satisfied, then a second need is activated. For example, the need for safety. Once we feel safe, a need for belongingness, etc., etc., up until the final eclipse, when we rise to the top of the pyramid, and that's self-actualization. In other words, making our true potential come true. And so this is a really famous model, and what it shows us is that people have certain needs, and that fulfilling those needs can motivate us to perform certain actions. This particular theory has been much criticized, however. There is not much empirical evidence. It's hard to generalize it across cultures because this ultimate need for self-actualization might be on top in the US or in Western societies where it was developed. But one can wonder whether that self-actualization need would also be at the top, for example, in more collectivistic Asian cultures, where the group and the us perspective is much more important. There are more needs theories, but they all share this one thing in common, which is the principle that as human beings we have certain needs. Satisfying those needs motivates behavior. If we look at some of the newer, more contemporary theories on motivation, we see that They try to explain how motivation happens, so the process underlying motivation. One famous example is expectancy theory. An expectancy theory is about making the links between performance and reward, and between reward and the value of those rewards very explicit. So it's about expectancy, it's about instrumentality. And basically this theory says if we make sure that a certain performance is followed by a certain reward and that we value those rewards, if those links are really clear, then people will become more motivated. The clearer they are, the more motivated people are. Similarly, goal setting theory states that if people set goals, then there is a process of setting the goal, fulfilling the goal, and that in itself is a motivational experience. Hybrid theory basically of needs and processes is what we call self-determination theory, which is probably the most popular motivation theory over the past decade. Annually, a conference is organized with hundreds of people studying specifically self-determination theory, just to give you an idea of how big and popular it is. And what this theory says is people have three basic human needs. We have a basic human need for autonomy, for competence or mastery, and for connectedness, so for social relations. If people find those three basic human needs fulfilled, then there's a process of engagement, of motivation, and that will subsequently increase performance. So, all in all, we've reflected on what motivation is, and we've mentioned some of the most popular and famous theories on motivation. One very interesting question though is, can we buy motivation? So if we look at organizational life as a manager, can we just say, I'm going to pay you and then you will become motivated? There's a TED Talk from Daniel Pink. This is actually not the TED Talk, this is an RSA Animate video. So it's basically the TED Talk that he does, but they draw all kinds of fun pictures while he's saying it. It's really worthwhile, so if you've never seen it before, check it on YouTube or on TED's home website. Daniel Pink's TED Talk is incredibly popular. It's been watched millions of times on YouTube. And what he says is financial incentives do not work. So among other things, there's one famous experiment they did. They had a group and they said there's a group of low reward, a group of medium reward, and a group of high reward. And we're going to have them do some tasks and see who performs best. It turns out that for really simple, routine, mechanical skills, high reward means high performance. For tasks that require even rudimentary cognitive skills, so if you even have to think about it only a bit, high reward means worse performance. So there's something going on here. We would all think just give them a bonus, pay them a lot of money, people will work harder, they'll perform better. In other words, incentives are a motivator. Daniel Pink actually states quite the opposite. He says this is not true. Higher reward means poorer performance. Can that be true? Let's look at some reasons why this could be true. Why money may not be all there is to make the world go round. So first of all, if we look at the distinction between motivation from inside and from the outside, incentives like money, bonuses, they are extrinsic motivators. So they don't come from within. There are several disadvantages of these extrinsic motivators. So what we just heard was, for cognitively complex tasks, it turns out that performance actually goes down. In addition, we see that if we give people high financial incentives, they will perform strategic behaviors. In other words, I will do exactly what is necessary to get that high reward, nothing more, nothing less. When opposite to that, if people do something from the inside because they're intrinsically motivated, they might be able to go the extra mile and do some extra organizational citizenship behaviors, for example. We also see that as human beings, we are insatiable. So yes, money can boost our satisfaction, our engagement, our motivation. In the short term, we might be happy with this big bonus, but it only lasts a short time. And even worse, once we get that bonus, once we get that, for example, that salary increase, then we just set new goals. So when we have this job, we think, wow, I want to go that step up in salary. Then we reach it, and then we see the manager above us making twice the money we make, and then we think, wow, we want that. So we're insatiable. And finally, salary is often seen not so much as a reward, as a motivating reward, but it's a prerogative. In other words, we work for this organization, so we should get this money in return for the work we do. So giving money might not be a motivator then, but it's actually something we feel that the organization owes us. We have a right to getting it. So what's the conclusion so far? Money doesn't work? Well, it would seem that way. It would seem that money indeed doesn't work. But let's look at some more research to support this statement. First of all, there's a meta-analysis of Judge and colleagues, 2010. In other words, they analyzed 92 studies at once. So they gathered all the data, put it together, ran their analyses. What did they find? First of all, they found a low correlation between salary and job satisfaction. In other words, receiving a high salary was not related or almost unrelated to being satisfied with your job. In addition, interestingly, the correlation between salary and salary satisfaction was also low. So getting a high salary doesn't even mean you'd be satisfied with that salary. Conclusion from this big meta-analysis: motivation? No, not for sale, because this correlation is so low, it doesn't really matter what we give them, but giving them more financial incentives, higher salary, it won't make people necessarily more motivated. Another meta-analysis, this time from Dacey and colleagues, 1999, so this is a bit older. They had 128 experiments. And they said, if people are working on an interesting task, extrinsic stimuli can actually undermine intrinsic motivation. In other words, if someone's working and they think, wow, I really have a nice job, it's so interesting what I do, and then people say you'll get a big bonus for it, we might actually reconsider and think, so maybe I'm just doing this for the money, and the intrinsic motivation could go down. There's another study, 2012, Cho and Perry. They did a study among 200,000 US employees. And they found intrinsically motivated workers perform better and are more engaged. In other words, again, this emphasizes the value of intrinsic motivation. If people really want to, if they find it intrinsically interesting, they will do better at work. However, there is one interesting note here at the bottom of the page. Cho and Perry noted that extrinsic motivators most definitely have a positive effect on performance and engagement. In other words, those extrinsic motivators did not necessarily have a negative effect or no effect. No, they also had a positive effect on these valued outcomes. Whoa, wait a minute. What's going on? So first we're saying intrinsic, 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 and incentives are actually bad. They can, if people even have to think a bit, their performance will go down. And now Cho and Perry are suddenly saying, hey, extrinsic motivators can also have a positive effect. Turns out there's a big discussion going on. On the one hand, we have this group of, for example, Daniel Pink, Dacey from self-determination theory, by the way, who are saying it's all about intrinsic motivation, and extrinsic motivators like financial incentives can undermine intrinsic motivation and performance. But then there's also another group of people who are saying, no, this is not true. In 2015, Shaw and Gupta wrote a provocation paper in Human Resource Management Journal. And they said, listen up, we are ignoring evidence. There is actually a massive body of scientific research that convincingly shows that financial incentives can definitely be effective. So everyone who's following these YouTube videos of Daniel Pink and saying, what? Extrinsic financial incentives are wrong, they're bad, they are actually wrong in having that opinion. Let's once again look at some of that empirical evidence. So first of all, there is a meta-analysis of 141 studies, 2014. They found a few interesting things. Specifically, they found that financial incentives can enhance both quantity and quality of performance. In other words, people do more and people do it better. Conclusion, yes, financial incentives definitely work. So, with regard to the central question, perhaps motivation is actually for sale. Another meta-analysis of 183 studies, again in 2014. And they found intrinsic and extrinsic incentives both have a positive relationship with performance. In other words, yes, intrinsic motivation is really important. And yes, extrinsic motivation is also important. In other words, giving people money, but also giving them a prize or, for example, a badge. If people in a company can win a badge for being Best Employee of the Month or recognized for certain expertise, these kinds of extrinsic stimuli can have a positive effect on performance. In addition, and this is contrary to what we heard from self-determination theory from the meta-analysis of Dacey and colleagues, they said extrinsic incentives can actually enhance the positive effect of intrinsic motivation on performance. So intrinsic motivation is crucial for performance, but extrinsic incentives can make that relationship even stronger. Conclusion, both are important, and extrinsic incentives can also have this effect of enhancing the positive link between intrinsic motivators and performance. And that, of course, is contrary to the earlier idea of extrinsic incentives undermining intrinsic motivation and performance. This is confusing. So now we have two sides of the stories that both have a valid empirical case. Both can show, based on scientific research, that their stance is actually the correct one. So let's try to put these puzzle pieces together and come up with a coherent answer. First of all, intrinsic motivation is crucial. There's no ignoring that fact. Whether you're part of the first or the second group, everyone agrees intrinsic motivation is really important. If we find things truly interesting, if it comes from within, yes, we'll work harder, we'll persevere longer, and we'll just be all around better in what we do. However, extrinsic motivation is also important. And in many cases, it's a basic condition. We need money to make a living. We need money to buy food, to buy clothes, etc., etc. So if we have to pay our mortgage, if we have animals at home, we need to feed them as well. So we need money. So we can't ignore the importance of extrinsic motivation. It is a basic condition and we need it. And that, of course, also tells us that yes, it can be a motivator. Importantly, these extrinsic incentives can be a motivator, but that only works if they are directly related to certain behavior or performance. In other words, a policy that we often see in companies nowadays is that people get bonuses in advance. So you already know, regardless of how you're going to perform, you'll get that big bonus. That will not have any motivational potential. Because why would you work harder for it if you already got the motivation? If you already got the reward. However, a different example, if you do a pay for performance system, which is also an HRM policy which is often done, that could actually work because then the reward is explicitly combined with the performance. If you perform more, if you perform better, then you get paid more. So in that case, it can be a motivator by itself, and it can actually also enhance intrinsic motivation because it can be a sign of recognition. I'm working really hard here, it's really interesting, and hey, my manager sees me, he rewards me for this hard work. So the conclusion is, let's try to find a good balance between these motivators. Intrinsic is super important, but we can't do without extrinsic. And we need to make sure that we find a good balance in which people are interested, engaged at work, but we also reward them accordingly. So thank you very much for listening to this knowledge clip. I hope you found it enjoying, and if you need any more information, you can always contact me.